Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting of December 5th, 2022. This evening's meeting is, as we said, a Committee of the Whole meeting. By that we mean we are going to have anywhere from brief to very deep discussions about the items that will be coming before the board, typically at future meetings. There will not, however, be any voting done at this meeting. Voting will take place at a future meeting, typically the next one on our agenda. Sometimes it's bumped out more than a week into the following month or months. But tonight's meeting is for primarily discussion purposes, question and answer, deep dive into the issues that are coming before the board. If you are following along this evening and you're here with us, agendas can be found just outside the door to my left. There's a table for both agendas and audience communication forms. If you are following along at home, the agenda can be found on our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org. If you hover over the board tab, you can drop down to board meeting information. There you can find tonight's agenda, and you can also find agendas and videos of previous meetings if you are looking for any of that information. The Livonia Public Schools teaches our children what we call our community with character principles from all the way from kindergarten through when they are leaving us, either as 12th graders or as 26-year-olds. The top of that list includes lists respect, and you have the commitment of this Board of Education that we will treat one another and everyone who comes before this Board of Education with respect. We find that is the very best way to teach our children, and I'm very proud of our community for modeling that. In return, we do ask that anyone who is participating in our meeting this evening do the same. We do have quite a few items on our agenda this evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. The first item on our agenda is audience communications. I do not have any blue slips. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to participate in audience communication? Alrighty, seeing none. We'll move on to Committee of the Whole. The only item under our Committee of the Whole is board officer discussion. We began this discussion in our study session prior to a Committee of the Whole meeting. I have had the honor of serving as the board president for the last few years. Prior to that, Mr. Johnson and I have each taken stints of that. I just need to make it known that due to my family requirements and obligations, I would not be interested in, simply don't have the time. I'm interested, I simply don't have the time to pursue the presidency for the upcoming school year. It has been a very significant honor of mine to have served in this role for a number of years. However, I would like to, at this point, suggest that we're looking in a short-term and longer term, that Mr. Johnson has done an exceptional job in this role. Mrs. Bradford, I think, would also do a terrific job in this role. And looking at the fact that Mr. Johnson and I have kind of shared this responsibility off and on for the last several years, I would like to suggest that Mr. Johnson take this nomination for the role of president next year, with Mrs. Bradford taking a nomination of vice president, so she can then become more acclimated into the obligations and responsibilities of the job, because I think that she would, in addition to Mr. Johnson doing a superb job in this role, I think Mrs. Bradford would also be well suited for the responsibilities. So I would like to, when the time comes at our next meetings, I would like to suggest Mr. Johnson as president for next year and Mrs. Bradford as the vice president of this role, of the board. Are there other thoughts, suggestions, comments, and thoughts on the secretary role also from board members?
President Burton.
Mrs. Acosta.
I was just going to say I'd like to learn about the position. I think Tammy would do a great job taking over that role, but I'd be interested in learning about the position for future consideration.
Sounds good. And when you say this, the position, you're talking about the secretary position.
Secretary.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, President Burton. First of all, I want to thank you for all of the years that you have served as president. You have led this board through some very, very difficult years. In the early years, not so bad, but as of late, I know it's been a very, very difficult position to hold. There's a lot of responsibilities. You have performed that role better than anyone could have ever expected. So I want to thank you for your time and your dedication to the board. I know how much effort you put in. I know how much effort I had put in. But through these last couple of years, clearly, it has taken on a two-headed monster. And you've led this board through many tough times, and I, for one, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
And I would be honored. It's always an honor and a privilege to serve this board, and I would be more than happy to continue that.
Excellent. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, President Burton. In serving as a role of secretary, it's been my honor to do that. I am looking forward to assuming the new role of vice president, and I know I have two great leaders to help me to learn under your tutelage. I think I will do well, and I'm planning on taking some MASB courses to further that role, to help me understand the role of a president. So I'm looking forward to that, and thank you to the board members for having the confidence in me to learn this role and maybe get into that in another year here. So thank you.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. I'd like to echo my colleagues in our gratitude for your leadership, both yours and Mark's, over the last several years when things have been very challenging. I think we have a wonderful board, some remarkable people, very talented people, and I think that anyone on this board could easily lead, and we would have a very successful board. Some people have expressed interest in being part of that leadership, and that's to their credit. Just because somebody hasn't expressed it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be capable of doing it, but maybe they have some other obligations, whether that's grandchildren or like myself, I'm president of the Education Foundation. You can only cut yourself into so many slices without compromising things that you hold dear and your ability to handle a job well. So I just would like to say that I will support whoever throws their hat in the ring. I think we have a talented board and we can't lose no matter what.
I would like to also, it's been alluded to, and we discussed it in the previous meeting, I think that Tammy Bonifield has done a superb job in the role as secretary, which takes a significant amount of multitasking in the middle of a meeting to take a lot of that information down. Tammy is, along with Dan and Karen, have made it look seamless, but it is no small task. I would love to see Tammy continue on in that role, and Tammy, if you're willing to continue to serve, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. I would, when the time comes, would definitely be appreciative of the nomination. And again, like everyone else has stated, the two of you guys have just been stellar, and we're very happy for you to be in the situation where you find that your time is being split and that you need to concentrate on your family. It's great news.
It is.
And we'll be happy to see Mark at the helm again. And Karen's gonna, I guess we're talking, Karen's not, I'm happy about Karen's nomination as well, or the soon-to-be nomination.
All right, thank you. What Mrs. Bonifield is alluding to, I have a few new grandbabies that we have been blessed with in our family over this past year that I have the privilege of being with 1 to 2 days a week in the middle of the week, but it does take a chunk of time that otherwise I would be doing some of my presidential duties. So that's what Mrs. Bonifield is alluding to. So it's a fun problem to have. I highly recommend it. Any other thoughts on the officer positions at this time? Alrighty, we will put this on, this will be on the agenda for the January organizational meeting, which happens, I believe, January 30th, but it does need to be discussed at these meetings leading up to that. Alrighty, at this time, I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Centers for the Building and Site.
Great, thank you very much. We have several items this evening, the first of which is a French presentation. Our friends of French are going to give us a 3D fly-through on some of the work that has been done here, and we're very excited to see that, what they've put together for us. So, Mr. Francis, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do. I want to just first take a moment to welcome up and introduce Amy Neckhart and Katie Mitevska from French Associates, familiar faces. For those of you at home tuning in, back in October, a couple months ago, they were here with us, and they spent some time doing a presentation with the design drawings. It went through the 5 schools that are being fully renovated, and also mentioned the schools that are having HVAC work done, the air conditioning included. So for those at home, when you see, we're going to go through and review some of those slides, but pretty quickly, just to kind of piece it all together. So for those of you at home who might not have seen the October, much longer and in-depth conversation, if you think that we're going a little quickly through those slides, it's because we've spent quite a bit of time on them back in October. So I'm going to turn it over. Oh, you guys have it on. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over, and I think, Amy, you're going to lead through some of these slides with us.
Yes, thank you everybody for having us again. We really appreciate it. Like Phil mentioned, we're just going to do a quick touch base, so I don't know if someone can switch to the presentation. So we're going to kind of just quickly touch base on the projects as a whole, and then we'll show you 3 of the projects in the fly-through. So we'll start at Cleveland. So overall, plan-wise, we have the renovation in the LMCs, the kitchen, and then general scope that was picked up, like doors and minor other reconfigurations that needed based on the needs of each building. So we just showed the kitchen reconfiguration and how we're making the flow a lot more efficient for the team in there. And then the LMC, we're creating an idea factory in any elementary and middle school building. And then we're also creating a flexible space. So we've got a movable wall to expand and contract as needed to allow for bigger or smaller groups in each media center. Moving to Rosedale, which is pretty similar to Cleveland. Same kind of scope. We've got the LMC renovation, we've got the kitchen, and some minor door replacements. Oh, there we go. For that kitchen, we actually swapped the kitchen and the storage, so we've got a lot larger space for the kitchen staff, and creates a better flow from keeping students out of the corridor as well. And then this one will have outside walk-in cooler storage. The media center, very similar. We've got the idea factory in the dark blue. We've got the books in the medium blue, and then we've got that flexible space with the nano wall to the, can't see my mouse, but it's going to be to the left with all those tables in there. Riley is our upper elementary school that we have for this 2023 project. Very similar. We've got the LMC scope, the kitchen. We've got a couple classrooms that needed the updated casework that we picked up so that they were all consistent with each other. This space stayed about the same, but we created better flow through the kitchen for the staff and the students. And then the media center, we opened it up. We created a nice large book area, but then a very flexible space where all the furniture is movable with a large flex space for them to grow into.
Okay, now this is Frost. Frost is a middle school, and it also has everything that we have in the other schools. Like in the blue, it is the media center. And then we have the kitchen, it is the green area. We do have a few bathrooms renovation, not too much. And we did have one alternate, which is accepted for the cooking room. The kitchen is, basically it stays pretty much the same with exception of the change in equipment because that kitchen is kind of in a good shape. We do have the media center is kind of, we reworked the whole thing. That's a big media center. So we did, when you come in from this side, we did put the book stacks right there. So you walk in and then you come to the up top is a flex space, all movable furniture here, and then the Idea Factory at the bottom. With all the, this one has a game space, which is very interesting, so you can see it in the fly-through. Franklin High School, that was quite a big project. Again, in the blue is the media center, green is the kitchen area, and we did have, again, a few alternates for the art room and the cooking room that we kind of accepted. The kitchen also, it is quite a, there is a change in the equipment and the serving area up top, so it can serve more students. The media center, again, it's a big space. There was a big computer lab at the top that we now turned it into a flex space. When you come in at the bottom, there was quite a few little rooms, so we knocked all of that down, and that is the book area. We put the office in this area, and that's all flexible space. So there are 2 small group rooms, and besides this flex area, we do have another space for students, so it can be like a whole class can get there and work on it. Amy.
So each school, we are renovating any toilet room that was not previously renovated. So we have a couple focus restrooms that will be for the public, like around the media centers. Those ones would receive the hard tile, ceramic tile wall, which is on the, for example, on the left, and then the epoxy flooring. And then most of the other ones just get the epoxy flooring over if it has an existing tile floor to help encapsulate those floors and hopefully provide a long-lasting product there.
Teresa?
Oh,
Never mind.
okay.
Yeah.
I think I missed a slide, though.
It's always technology.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I wanted to make sure we didn't miss something. And then we have 3 projects this summer for the air conditioning upgrades. So we've got Webster Elementary School, and that one has a little bit of a mix. We're replacing some of the vertical unit ventilators and putting air conditioning in the classrooms and upgrading those systems, and then a couple of them get the coil in the system, similar to this year's projects. As well as Roosevelt, very similar to that, and then Stevenson will be receiving the AC coil in their existing units. So that all those buildings will now have air conditioning in the student spaces.
Just as a reminder, we took a big bite out of this during the summer of '22 recently with getting air conditioning, not only in the 5 buildings that we renovated, but multiple others as well. And we have a couple of buildings that are currently air conditioned already, Buchanan and Nigiero. When we do go into the renovations, we'll check their systems to ensure that they're up to par. But at this point, the goal is at the end of 2023 work is that we have them, all the buildings, having air conditioning.
And this is just a diagram showing those upgrades to the existing systems. Now we'll go into the animations, the fun part. So we're going to start with Rosedale. Rosedale and Cleveland are very similar, so we only animated one, but you'll get the feel of the space and the activity that will be going on. So I'll hit play here. If I can the mouse. There we go. So this is as you're walking into the media, oops, sorry about that. This is as you're walking into the media center. You're going to enter right into the flexible space. This is where the teacher would be able to hold like little reading groups. And then you're coming into the book area. So all those bookcases that you see out in the middle, those are flexible. She can move them around as needed if there's an event going on in the space. And then we're turning now into the flex space. So that's that nano wall. It opens right up, allows you into this space that can expand out as needed and close when privacy is needed. We're just zooming by the office. And now you have a better view of that teaching space for the specialist.
Yeah, the teacher was saying that she might want that area to have the kids sit down, like the kindergartners and first graders, and have a reading space, so we kept that area available.
And then we're entering the Idea Factory. And this space is very similar in the Cleveland and any going forward, we kind of keep the same consistency. And then there's visibility to the corridor from that window, visibility from almost all angles into this space, but also a little bit of privacy for those students when they're working on projects. But you want them to engage in that space.
We kind of wanted kids to see from the other side, hey, what's going on in there? Like, I'm interested in that and doing some fun work in the Idea Factory. So we didn't want it to be all closed up and like nobody sees what's going on in there.
Yeah, do you want to mention the planes, Amy?
So those acoustical planes, they help with the sound, but they're also fun, kind of engaging for the students.
So as
Couple
opposed to the
colors.
traditional acoustical panels that are attached to the wall, which are fine and can look nice, these have more of a playful touch and more elementary theme to it.
Okay.
In the meantime, absorb some of the sound.
So if you want to ask questions, we can stop at a time. I mean, Amy can go through it again, and we can stop it at a certain point if you would like to. If not, we can continue, but we can stop at the animation at any time.
Okay.
Was there anything that stuck out that you want to see specifically? Mhm. Yeah, the principal actually had said that when we were meeting with her at one point, talking about furniture, she had mentioned that when we paint the poles and the posts that are in the media specialist and the principal, they said they get dinged up so quickly, little hands touching them, chairs hitting them, and the paint peels and chips right away. So we're putting up a protective wrap, but it's also a decorative wrap around the poles. So it gives it a little bit of flair, but at the same time, its true purpose is the protection of it.
So this one's the ABCs, so it kind of relates to the books, kind of ties it all together.
Oh, that's good. I didn't even notice that.
Will that be easily maintainable? In other words, if it's damaged?
It's actually a really hard surface, so it shouldn't break. I forget what it's made of. I don't know if it's a PVC or.
Yeah, it's like a composite
Yeah.
panel.
It's composite.
It's not just a wall covering.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like
Yeah.
made to be a protectant, and they're using it as a wrap around the post.
Okay, so it's like a decorative PVC.
Correct, yeah, or some type of composite to be hard but yet, instead of just being white or something like
Yeah.
that, it's got a design on it.
Okay.
I just love how colorful and inviting the media centers are. And it's not just the elementaries at this point, but especially with the elementaries. It's not the place where you have to walk in a rectangular room and sit down and be quiet anymore. I mean, there's time and a place for some quiet work, but they're very exciting and engaging and inviting, and it's exciting to see.
I just wanted to say that
Oh, your mic.
There we go. I had reason to be in Grant and Cooper's new LMCs, the revised ones, after we had already seen a fly-through of them. And in person, this does not do justice to it. They're so spacious and inviting and colorful. When we look at this looks interesting and fun, but the real thing is utterly amazing. And I hope that we have an opportunity as a group to go and see them. If you have any chance at all, just stop by. They're just indescribable. They're so beautiful.
Sure.
Thank you, thank you, I
And we will
appreciate
be
it.
at Emerson in January for our,
Mike.
and we will be at Emerson in January, the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, for our study session. So you'll be able to see Emerson in person.
Yeah, we can
Any other
go
comments?
We can
through
probably-
once more.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to hop on to the next one, or you want to finish this
Next one's good.
fly-through? Okay,
Do I get to the next one?
I think. In this game.
Now we gotta see if we, do we have to roll through that or go to, okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, this is Frost. This is Frost Middle School in,
The design is different than Riley, but they're both large, former middle school type buildings. So even though Riley being an upper L has a large media center and Frost has a large media center, so we just chose one to show.
This moment of silence brought to you by.
It's weird, I ran it on my computer earlier, it was totally fine, it just clicked right through.
There.
Oh, we're up now.
yeah, there we go.
It's just slow.
So first, this is when you come in from the corridor.
Oh, yeah.
And it is, you go right through the book area. That is kind of broken down with, there is some soft seating that you can see. It's broken down. And it goes from that book area, you can see all the way outside, which is pretty nice. To the left is right there is the game room that you can kind of pick. We'll go into the game room now so you can see it. We did close it off, it was open. If you look into the ceiling, we have very interesting ceiling with some kind of open grid.
Okay.
This is the office, what you see right now is the office, the media center office. And then from there, you can see to the left just a sitting area. And then also, okay, so this is all the flexible seating. Look at the ceiling. We did the ceiling, open the ceiling, so it is, we put actually ceiling tile that is black because the space is high, so we wanted to get a nice atmosphere in it. You can peek into the Idea Factory with those angled windows. And we do have, look at the ceiling, we do have clouds that are green that kind of reflect the theme of Frost. With the lights that are different shape, circle, triangle. And here we have some clouds below the ceiling. There are some clouds that again have that feeling of green and open grid in the middle. So we just wanted to make that space more interesting than, very interesting to be. Again, looking back into the book area.
And this part's purposeful because we wanted the students to travel through the books to come into the main part of
Okay, good.
the library.
Now, did we not go through I thought that we had the flex space also with the nano wall. We did, it was really quick, so, sorry, I missed it. I apologize, but it was there.
So we can run through and stop or have any comments if you like.
Mrs. Bradford?
I think it looks wonderful. I really like the lower ceiling, those clouds.
clouds.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, were some of the lighting in a hexagonal
Yes,
shape
it
also?
is a hexagonal shape, plus in the other area, we do have hexagon lighting.
Yes, I
So
thought
it
that
is-
was really great.
yeah.
And it looks
Which is-
very inviting.
Right,
Yeah.
we just wanted to do a different shape, so it's more interesting for the students.
Great.
I think the most popular room's gonna be the game room. I can already see that being filled in, but
They have actually right now, if
So
you go
here-
into the
here is
Frost
the-
Media Center, they have it there now, except it's just open into the library. In this configuration, we're able to close it off with a glass wall so that there's still visibility, but helps with the sound.
And I believe they do some PBIS reward
In
time
that
in
area.
that area.
Excellent.
Mr. Johnson?
And Phil, wasn't there a 3D printer
In the makerspace.
in the makers?
Yeah, and so that will be part of the Idea Factory.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Wonder where that was gonna go.
Yeah.
They actually took what used to be the media specialist office
It's the
and
office
started
now.
using it, and now it's going back to the office, and
Okay.
we've got their own, because
That's
we've got
what
their
I
own
thought it
dedicated
was.
space. And what's not shown in some of the ancillary sections of the LMC is that there was a mishmash
There's the
of offices that weren't really
That's
good
the Idea
working
Factory.
offices, and we've created some better space for actual office space and then the workroom space. So
Okay,
that's
good.
not in this, that's that kind of working area, but it's connected to the LMC on the hallway side. And those are getting kind of fixed up to work better for the building.
Okay.
Okay, so that, yeah, that is the flex space, the nanable,
Oh,
that,
there
we
it is.
go. Uh-huh.
that opens up. So it is kind of across from the Idea Factory. So if you're in the Idea Factory, you can look
see if I can get
all the
us
way
in.
at the end to the flex space.
Okay.
And vice versa.
If we kept spinning and completely, so we'd have to go another 90 degrees to the right, it's hard to catch in the 3D rendering, but as you come out of the area, the workroom and then some adjacent offices that I was discussing before, there's a little nook area that's going to be specific for the center programs to have their own space to sit and have some soft seating and peruse books, et cetera. So they've got enough space at Frost, and as opposed to Riley, which is really a gigantic as well, but it's a big rectangle. Frost has some little nooks and
Yeah.
and areas, so trying to
Nuances to it.
utilize some of those spaces for the students.
Okay.
And then the last one.
Okay, so that's, last one is Franklin.
Oh, that looks cool.
Okay, so now, this is when you come in. So when you come in, you come right into the space, and it's all open. It's not like closed in like it was before, but it's all open. You come to your soft sitting. And then on the right side, when you come in, all that book stacks, as you can see them all the way through. You're looking at right now into the office area, the media center office, and if you can look at that, the panel, acoustical panels, we are reworking all the actually putting new panels on top of the existing panels, so the acoustics is much better. And they are kind of in a different shape and different colors. There's a space here for a whole student, for a whole class to sit down and work. We have some booths around the glass area. Right in front, you're gonna see the flex space with the nano wall open. That used to be the computer lab. In front of it, there is, you can see there is more tables too, that they will not be there at that time. Only when you have to use them, they will be used them, so that space will be more open. Then there's a lot of soft sitting with area that the students can work. And then behind, if you can see that like a wood, that is also a acoustical panels. We do have some clouds hanging down, 2 clouds with a ceiling tile, and everything else is just lights, so round lights.
Okay.
When you, again, now we're looking into the book area, and there is, again, so when we come to there, that's the exit to the outside into the corridor.
If you're familiar at all with Franklin's LMC, when you walk in those first doors, you immediately have to go right or left. It's very broken. And one of the first things when we walked with the principal, one of the assistant principals, and the media specialist, they all said, get rid
Blow
of
it
this.
open.
Yes, it's because you come in and it's just dead space. And you have to go left or right to get in. So that, when you see it, it comes open. And the other interesting thing, and I distinctly remember this when we all walked, there's a large group of us that went and walked through with the folks from Franklin before design occurred. And the students that were in there, I mean, these are high schoolers. It's got this more adult feel, the way it's been designed, because I looked around and we saw students, somebody sitting by themselves just doing some work, somebody just sitting and reading, a couple of students sitting together, and there was only a limited amount of space to do that, and most of it was a traditional hard table and a traditional chair, kind of like what I'm doing right now. So when you look here, I think those booths are gonna be popular.
Oh, yeah.
Right up
They'll be
against, that's the
taken
bus loop on the other
immediately.
side, it's got the glass, you can see out.
Panels
It-
would be
it-
really striking. when
Yeah,
you come
and,
in.
and right now, it's gotten over the years, it's kind of got a dingier look on the panels that are up there, so dressing them up will help both aesthetically, but also acoustically. And just in general, and one of the things that Ms. Hart said, who's the media specialist, was that, they had all these computers, desktops right in the middle of the library. And it had like wood walls blocking it and everything. We said, we want to open this up. She said, but I do at times have a whole class's worth of students working on them. So this area that we just passed, we can have that be more of a mobile with the carts of desktops, that students could still do that and be able to hit it and print and do that. Let me print my paper before I go back to class type of situation. So we're trying to make it functional and give it, like I said, more of if you go to Schoolcraft's library, it's got a little bit more of a relaxed feel, but definitely, this should be occurring in this space and something else should be occurring. Those booths are gonna be used very differently than the whole section that a class can be in with a little bit of privacy. And another thing they talked about when we visited was, again, if you've been in this library as it is now, very, very, very tall bookshelves. And people get hidden, if you will, in between them. And so, as we've done elsewhere, everything's capping at 48 inches high, unless it's, of course, already against a wall. So you get a good line of sight all around from any vantage point.
Ms. Bradford.
Thank you. I do have a question on the lighting. I'm going back to lighting. I think that's interesting. The lighting that you are putting in, will that be something that will be put in at all 3 high schools? I'm just thinking of purchasing light bulbs and things like that. I don't know how they work for lighting, but it looks like it's a specialty type of lighting.
There are different lights that we have using in different spaces right here. Some will be the same as in the other high schools. Some will be probably different depending on the design. Here, it just came that it's the better to have the round light fixtures because they suit that space. I know that Stevenson High School is pretty similar to Franklin, so probably you will have the same, but that will come with the design. But we're gonna look into that, it is kind of standardized, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as you're purchasing
Right.
and repurchasing.
Yes.
If you have all sorts of different light bulbs, that could be a problem or just could
And
be-
these are all gonna be LED, so the life on them, of course,
Oh,
are
that's
far
great.
extended.
Oh,
These aren't traditional fluorescents.
Right.
Excellent.
But like in the Idea Factory, we have in all the schools, except in the elementary, the middle schools, and the high schools, we do have those triangle and then square and the round lights that they are the same. So there we're standardizing.
Great.
But we cannot do all of them. Like Frost has those hexagon lights. We're not sure if we're gonna use them someplace else. It depends, it's gonna be the same, similar light fixture, but the shape, it depends on the design.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. I'm assuming what we were seeing from a color scheme is just an idea, because this would be very acceptable to Stevenson, because there's a lot of blue in there. I'm assuming that being Franklin, we're going to have a different color scheme.
This is the color scheme
Yeah.
that
We-
they show.
we-
Red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
Yes.
It had red furniture, but
Yes.
it's going to be all,
So the colors was chosen by the school, and you'll see more red and blue. I mean, you have the blues up top, and sometimes the computer, depending on how dark or light.
Right.
But the other piece of this is, that if you've noticed, both last year and now in the items we've seen for the coming year, the media centers, we didn't necessarily say, let's get school colors into that room. It's kind of its own space. So you see some blacks and some oranges and some, I'm gonna say lime, but it's not really right. What's the right?
It is the
chartreuse?
green.
It's like a chartreuse, different colors, and especially at the elementaries, it's more colorful. But as we look through, there's a lot, it's actually heavy blue, and then the red furniture would be the
yeah, all the
contrast.
piping is
orange
blue
there.
and,
The piping is blue. Right now, it is red, but we are painting it blue because that was the color scheme that was chosen by the school.
And the carpet has.
The
Franklin
carpet
chose that
has-
color?
The carpet
Franklin
has
chose
red.
that color?
Correct.
Blue's the
They're red,
color.
white, and blue.
I mean,
yeah. I would have thought they'd have more red, but.
Yeah, they mentioned some of their newer furniture and like the computer labs, their flexible spaces had that blue, so that we're trying to tie those spaces together.
Okay. And there is some red, if you can see there on the wall, so we do have red.
and sometimes I think some of the buildings want to pull back on too much red, because overuse of red starts to get,
Exciting.
yeah, it's an excitement color. Mhm. Yeah, there you can see some of the furniture tying in. And if that person in that sweatshirt would just stand there the whole time and more red.
Well, there were some red cars that were going by.
Just have them do laps all day.
There's, and what's not, what you don't see is the electrical that we're working on, so we make sure we have runs in the middle of the area for some of the work for students, upgrading some of the circuits for the back. They have currently a very, very oversized workspace that doesn't get utilized like it did years ago. So we're using part of that, making sure we have appropriate power, because right now, when they plug too many Chrome carts in to charge, they pop. So we're gonna make sure that they have a space to store those, plug those in, that is with the appropriate electrical power. Like, none of those things you see on a
Right.
3D fly-through, but all those conversations we had with the media specialists and the administrators saying, how does this get used, and how can we reimagine it, but also, what goes wrong? You know, what do you need?
And one thing I wanted to point out about Franklin is they kept saying, we're gonna have like 2 to 3 classes in this space at once. So that's why we focused on those clouds, on helping with acoustics, because that is a large open space. So you'll see that the one acoustical cloud is focused over that computer station. And then we've got, tucked in one corner, we have another teaching space that allows for a whole class. And then we've got the flex place that can even allow for the whole staff together. So that was really important that they had those 3 options in this space.
And they have a small green screen room in the corner, because they know that they have students that work for classes, so we put that in. And so there's, there's quite a bit that, I mean, I love seeing these, but I think you said it, Mrs. Jarvis, that going into them is different.
Oh, it's so different.
Yeah.
Because you can put eyes on everything then.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to also acknowledge, I believe this is Katie's last meeting
Yes.
with us.
Yes,
And
it is.
I wanted to mention that a few of us met Katie over 9 years ago in this room.
Yeah,
When
correct.
French was interviewing for the 2013 bond. And I can tell you without a doubt, Katie is just one of the most, just one of the greatest pleasures I've had to work with throughout both of our bond series. Her creativity, her passion for her work, her integrity, her work ethic is really unparalleled. She has been a great thought partner to us. We traveled many schools together with many carpet samples on the ground throughout the 2013 bond. And to have her back with us for this period of time has been really, really important. She has been such a value add in so many ways as we've gone through for a second time and been able to recapture some of those areas we weren't able to do through the first bond. So I just wanted to thank her for all that she's given to us and tell you what a tremendous pleasure and honor it's been working with you.
Well, like I said, thank you. You're one of my favorite school districts, without any doubt. And I can say that really, truly. Because when you work with people that love their job, it's easy to be working. So I had great time working with you guys, and I don't want to cry. No. And you have Amy's phenomenal, so she's gonna continue. She's phenomenal. So French is really, really pleased to be here in this school district, just so they know.
This is not just her last time here, this is her last board meeting,
Board
she
meeting.
claims, period. I'm challenging that and thinking I'm gonna somehow get her back at another one just for fun. But this is, she's going out with Livonia Public Schools because this is her last board meeting that she's gonna attend
Right.
anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It has been our honor to work with you, Katie. It's as Andrea said, some of us only remember doing bond work with you being part of that process for our district. And your expertise gave us a lot of comfort knowing that we may not be experts in your field, but we knew that you definitely are. And your confidence and your experience has shown through. It has been a joy to work with you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I remember one thing that when we came for the first time, 2013, and I don't know who asked the question, how can we do all that work in that time? And I said, well, there are more hours in the day than 8 hours. So that's how we are doing it, because there are exactly more hours in the day.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Katie.
being
Thank you
here
all for
today,
having
and
us.
thank you both. All right. Well, that was exciting. That brings us to item B, Mr. Weber, are you joining us for this section? Great. Item 3B is bid results for summer 2023 roof replacement.
As mentioned previously, Kennedy Elementary School and a portion of Stevenson High School are on the docket for the summer of 2023. And I just want to point out in your packet, you may not have noticed it, but we just want to point it out, that in the color coding of the roof area plans that we provided, Stevenson has 2017 survey data listed above the key. That is a typo, that's actually 2021. So if you see an area that's color that you thought, oh my goodness, that's been quite some time, it must be really, really bad now. The 2017 throws you off. It's really 2021, so it's much more recent.
Okay.
You want to just kick off a little background?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So as Phil mentioned, this is continuing our roof replacement program. We did not pause it, we slowed down a little bit with the economy and the lead times with roofing. So we just did the one school last year. So knowing that we had needs in the district, we couldn't stop the program completely. We've talked and shuffled the deck a little bit to understand what the immediate needs are, and these two schools rose to the surface of what's been causing maintenance issues with Mr. Lau's team in the district. So we had agreed to put these out for bid, which exactly we did, and lays out on our cover page as typical. Was a public bid advertised on the Sigma website and in the newspapers. So those went out in early November. We received bids in mid-November. There were 4 contractors did respond. Most of them, 3 of the 4 are known in the district for doing previous work. We did have, and we'll go through the packet here, we did have a low bidder, Division 7, that is not being recommended tonight, and we can talk through. They were recommended and awarded for the robotics program. However, based on some feedback with previous work with RTA, we felt like, as a team, we wanted to see performance on the robotics center before we give them the challenge of doing 2 sizable buildings in a shortened summer period.
While also doing the other one. So
Yes.
it was more of a small firm, and they've been excellent. They really want to have a relationship with Livonia Public Schools. I don't believe, and correct me if I say this inappropriately, but that they were not in a position or taking the position of arguing the points, or they of course in the post-bid interview explained that they do believe they had the manpower and any other jobs in the past. I believe they said that on a particular one that RTA worked with them on, they had not their own folks, but they had third-party contractors as the crew on there. So they basically are saying they're growing, and we wanted to say back to them, or we did say back to them, then work on the roof that we have you on right now, and let's see how that comes out, and then we'll continue to move forward and see if this relationship builds and grows. Lutz is a larger company. We use them. You probably all have heard that name, working in Livonia Public Schools. We know they have the manpower. We feel more confident splitting this up, and when I say splitting it up, I mean letting D7 be on LCTC, so I should really say robotics, because we're not on the LCTC roof that was already completely redone, doing that new roof as opposed to a full tear off, et cetera. And I may say that they didn't do the actual, they didn't join us for the, they didn't walk the roof at Stevenson and Kennedy, so we're not 100% confident either that they saw all the details that are required before they put their bid together, which ended up being low. So we have talked through this multiple times and tried to be very logical and methodical, but also talk to the companies to say, where we're at, what they believe, and where we're gonna land.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, echoing Phil, it was a very positive post-bid meeting, and they understood that our understanding of where they're at and how they still would have an opportunity. We don't want to close the door on them, but just to be sure, like we said, it is a short period over the summer, and we want to make sure that we're going through it in a thorough process and making sure we're setting ourselves up as best as we can right now, so. And we actually do have a meeting with them tomorrow to kick off the robotics program, so the dialogue will continue with them, and hopefully that's a relationship that we can grow in the coming years here. I can share good news too this time. It's gonna be 2 in a row.
Yeah, no, do that.
So
That's
if
good
we
stuff.
flip to page 3, we have our typical cost summary. So as I alluded to before, we did see some crazy pricing in the last couple of years with supply chain issues. So it was multiple meetings in the last couple of months that we had to realign our budgets in the sinking fund, understanding what our look ahead is for the next few years, understanding that roofs are a priority. The budgets that we had set a couple years back had to be kind of tossed out the window and reset based on not knowing where the economy was. Fortunate to say that our prices did come back down to what we were seeing in the 2018, 2019 period. We're about $17 or $18 a foot, where last year we saw prices at $30 a foot.
So it was good we paused.
It was, yes,
Absolutely.
it was a very good idea to pause.
Saved hundreds of thousands.
It was hard conversations last year knowing where we were in, but we couldn't stop the program, so we had to keep it going, but slowing it down, and then also designing more buildings. We also have on the backlog that, at our disposal right now, that once we meet as a team and understanding that we do have the savings now, what's the plan of approach in the next coming years? We now have that option to act quickly if we need to, so it's good news all around with, not just cost, but the supply chain is catching up, and we had material issue deliveries in the last few summers that I think we're gonna be able to overcome and get the stuff ordered and not be waiting until the 1st of August to get some materials like we had to a couple years ago, so. All in all, the summary reads as typical, but our initial budget was $5.5 million, 5.526 million. Our actual costs for hard bid was $3.5 million. Excuse me. Rolling those contingencies, and you'll see at the bottom that with contingency, we had $5.8 million. Our actuals were 3.7, so we're coming in $2 million under budget, which is good news.
Excellent news.
And then return of contingency from last year.
That is correct.
As well, really is, if you recall, the 2 months in a row for Mr. Weber here is that he got to report the news that we brought the about 1.5, I think it was. What was
Yep,
it?
for
About
the
1.5
last round, yep.
on the last contingency for the roofs, because they've gone smoothly.
Yep.
Excellent.
So. Oh, yeah, and then flipping through the rest of the packet, there's, once again, we have RTA Roofing Technology Associates, local firm, was the design on this, so they were the partner in putting this package together. And then the last 2 pages would roll into the, I'm sorry, there's a bid tab in there as well, showing the 4 firms that had bid, showing Division 7 as low bid, and then Lutz Roofing coming in second place. And just so everybody's aware, we also did a post bid with MTD Construction. They did not bid Stevenson High School, they're a smaller firm. They'd done Hayes, I believe, 2 years ago for us. So they did bid on Kennedy. We wanted to make sure that if Lutz was not capable of doing both schools, we wanted to know all of our options at this point, so we brought MTD in as well, just to flush everybody out. And then the last 2 pages were the heat maps that Phil had mentioned, just to show conditions that we based our initial conversations on, along with conversations with Mr. Roberts, Mr. Lau, where they're getting a lot of maintenance calls.
Great. Any questions, comments? It's great to see things under budget. So we would like to see this in the regular agenda for the next regular board meeting.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Weber, are you staying for art tables? And
He's been enjoying himself thus far, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna let him go home to his children.
This is not my last board meeting, by the way. I got a few more.
No, we're not letting you go that easily.
you guys
No
too,
fly-throughs
Brian.
either, yeah.
All right,
Thank you,
thanks for
everybody.
joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, item 3C is purchase of art tables. Mr. Francis.
Thank you very much. A couple of years ago, we bought with the 2021 bond art tables at several of the buildings. And over the past couple of years, talking to a couple of the art teachers and the principals, they had asked about art tables in their rooms that were showing that they were past their useful life. Essentially, one of these schools that we are now going to come back with art tables is Franklin High School. So Churchill and Stevenson have butcher block top art tables, and we were able to refinish them. They came out looking like they're new. If you're familiar with butcher block, that's the beauty of it. Franklin did not have those traditionally. They had some traditional laminate top tables, so they're in pretty poor condition. So we have 5 buildings that, working with the art department leaders, elementary and secondary, putting eyes on the rooms that were not taken care of the last time. We did some work here, added them up, and decided to purchase the same exact types of tables that we came to with couple of years ago for the first round of this. And we have Buchanan, Cooper, Johnson, Kennedy, and Franklin getting proposed new art tables to replace the ones that they have. So these are, again, working through IE, and Smith Systems is the manufacturer. IE, sorry, Interior Environments is the furniture company. So we have $90,245.21 as their proposal, and this is being done through the contract pricing NCPA with Smith Systems, so that will satisfy the board's requirement to bid. So very similarly to before, this would mean that Interior Environments and Smith Systems would handle the delivery and the install of these tables. And so I'm coming to the board with this recommendation and would hope to put this on the voting meeting.
Great. Any questions or comments?
No.
All right, let's go ahead and put it on the regular voting meeting.
Just to clarify, even though the first round of these a couple years ago was done through the bond, this is not being done through the 2021 bond. That one was done through the 13 bond. This is actually going through general fund at this point. They're
Thank you,
working
Mr.
with
Francis.
Mrs. Smith on that.
Great. That brings us to item 3D, which is purchase of copy paper.
This is an item that you're all well aware of, or I should say at least well familiar with, because we've come twice thus far. With the current backlog and difficulty of getting paper, we are under the continued restriction of only getting one truckload at least 10 weeks apart. So we've done this twice for the current 22-23 school year. And Mr. Law was bringing the recommendation from Contract Paper Group to get the third truck. And I said, let's just go to the board and get approvals for the third and fourth, because he already states, if you looked at his memo, that his intention is to purchase both, it just have to wait 10 weeks apart. So my intention here is to bring to the board the third and the fourth, which should be the final truckload for purchase to the board now, get approval on those dollars, and then when we have to put the purchase order on in the future for the fourth truck, we would be able to do that without having to come back to the board for the approval, because we'd have the conversation now and approval now, hopefully.
Great. Questions, Mr. Burke?
Yeah, Mr. Francis, I seem to remember that we talked about this probably around the first truck or maybe the second that we had to order. And at that point, the pricing was was fluctuating so much that that you did not have the confidence that we could approve an amount of money. Has the pricing stabilized, or have we gotten a commitment from the company?
It
Or are we
actually-
going to not to exceed?
Yeah, they actually, it went up at $3.79 per carton in this current pricing. So they've told us that this is because it's immediately the 10 weeks after, that it should be stable, but I would, to feel better about it, putting this on the voting meeting, I'd like to put a contingency into the amount just to get a not to exceed on the percentages of how it's, because from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, I'd like to take a look at what the percentages have been and just see what that increase possibly could be and take a stab. Remember, even if we go wildly above with contingency, if it doesn't go up, we don't spend it.
Right.
We only spend what it's gonna cost. It's just a matter of having the board's approval for the full dollar amount.
And then as a follow-up, the company that we're going with is the least expensive company that we can get this volume of product from, correct?
Right. And really, we could, unfortunately, we would be getting from them through the Wayne County contract. We would have gotten it all in August if it was available all at one time. It's the shortage that they're saying you can only get this much for this time period. Otherwise, we would have done this, as we've done for many years in a
Right.
row.
For the whole
Ordering
year.
it and buying it all up front and having it for the year. We just have to live with the lead times on
Piecemeal it.
this and the restrictions of how much you can get at any given time. Any bump through the waiting period is unfortunately based upon the market.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Would anyone have an objection of putting this on consent?
That's fine with me.
Let's go ahead and add it to
Yep,
cons-
good
to
idea.
consent then.
Very good idea.
Thank you, Mrs. All right, then it brings us to item 3E, which is purchase of maintenance vehicle, singular.
Singular. So give you a little background. This is an F-250 2023 model year vehicle, and it will be replacing, so for many years, we've had our own tow truck, a larger tow truck, and something we call a tug. It's not really a truck, in my memo, I called it a vehicle. It doesn't look like a traditional truck. It's from 1996, so obviously, and the wrecker, the tower that we had is from 97. So these are items that are beyond beyond their useful life. Pictures of them, you'll see rust on the undercarriage, you'll see rust across them. They're just old vehicles. At one point, and we've been discussing both of these items with Mr. Lau and Facilities and Operations, as well as Mr. Martin, who is our garage supervisor, talking about what do we want to do and what makes the most sense for us. Having a large tow truck any longer doesn't make sense for us. They're difficult to get, they're very, very expensive, and we can always call a tow company if we had a bus on a street that we had to hook up and tow with a traditional tow truck. Fortunately, that need doesn't have to occur very often. Unfortunately, sometimes it does, but then we can go ahead and call a third party and ask them to get the tow. What we're doing here with the tug, what that used to do also was that it pushed around our vehicles. So let's say there was a dead vehicle in our yard. It has a flat front additional on it that's been mounted to it, so it can just sort of push things out of the way. It also had battery jumpers, and back years ago, they also had fluids in it, so they drive it kind of up and down in the bus yard and refill the fluids in the buses and whatnot. We just don't do that anymore, but we do need something that could ride the charger out to a bus that may be dead, or to push, whether it be off the street to get it off from blocking traffic, or in our yard to push it. So this 250 will have the front assembly on it as well, flattened out so it can, again, push vehicles as needed. We can move the jumpers to buses either on the street or in the yard if they need. So basically, we're going to be replacing what we do now with this 250. What we can't do is hook up a 77-passenger bus and tow it, but we would go to a third party when needed to call them out to tow any bus that needed that. So we save up front hundreds of thousands of dollars in a very large, like 750 probably at least, sized vehicle to tow. And just now going from those two items down to one in this 250. I hope I laid that out well.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Francis, my guess is there is no trade-in value for the vehicles that we presently got.
I will check on the condition, the pictures, and looking at them in person, and then Mr. Martin sent me the pictures that he had taken up close. They are very old, and they show very old. Yeah, and they show very old, because they've gotten a lot of use, and generally speaking, the use, what they
Rough
are
use.
for, yes, is very rough on the vehicle itself. I can ask and confirm with Mr. Martin if he thinks there is any value in the larger one. The tug, honestly, if you saw it, you'd think it needed something to push it around.
So what do we do with them if there's no trade-in on them?
Just properly dispose of them, and
Okay.
we have Rick Martin take care of that type of, whether it be a sale via auction with the vehicle or a proper disposal. If it goes to I'll check with him to exactly where it goes, because it's an interesting question. I don't have the exact answer of where he takes it to just dispose of it completely.
Then looking at the, I guess it's the invoice, it says it's a 30-plus week lead time.
So, right now, vehicles are very difficult to get. The way we are able to get any vehicles is only because Gorno Ford, we've been a customer of, and the salesperson who Mr. Lau has been working with for years said, if you want to get a vehicle, you guys go to the front of the line because we have been their customer, and you have to commit to So if you see in there, it says that we need to at least sign off on the quote, et cetera, to commit to saying, yes, we really are going to be working through this. The lead times are still very long, but the supply is short. And when we try to get a vehicle, we've been talking and looking for a while. You couldn't even get the 22s. So the pricing got all thrown off from anything that we even talked about with 22s. And the rep at Gorno said, the second it comes out, and we didn't know when the pricing program was even gonna be dropped. It was just kind of week after week after week after week, having these conversations, saying, we can't get you anything, we can't get you anything. And then when it did come out, he immediately, because of the relationship, reached out, the salesperson did, and said, if you need something, tell me now, because we only have so many that we can get, and it's a long lead time. So we wanted to make sure we got it in now, and with hopes to get it within the current, the current year.
Okay, so if our vehicles are in bad shape, do we have a contingency plan if they break down?
The tug it still moves around, right?
Okay.
So it needs to be replaced. Mr. Martin has asked, actually a couple years ago, he kept putting on the radar, we kept holding off. Now we decided it's the time. So they are magicians in the garage, right? They can get things to continue oftentimes beyond their useful life, but the appropriateness now is to say, we need to get something, because we don't know at what point it completely stops. And unfortunately, the tug is really something that we mostly are using around the yard, so it's not a typical vehicle. If you looked at it, it doesn't look like a truck even, right? It's not really something that you normally would just hop in and run down to the road with. It's very specific to that need.
And otherwise, we would call a towing company.
Exactly, yeah.
So our backup
We've
would
got a
be to
towing
utilize our
company.
towing
Yeah,
companies.
that's all.
Until we get
that's it.
That's going to be what our then
That is
first
the
plan would be.
Yeah.
once we
And
get
ultimately, when you just
yeah.
have to move it a little bit, you don't want to spend the money on calling a tow truck over to do that. But if that's what you have to do in the interim, then that's what we do.
Okay.
All right, Mrs. Byrne.
So the current tug and the current tow truck that we have are 25 years old each.
Yeah, 97 and 96.
Okay, we've gotten excellent use out of those then. Okay, and it's just not cost-effective to continue with that plan. Okay, all righty, thank you.
Excellent. All right, let's put that on regular agenda.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, item 3F is purchase of school buses in the 2021 bond.
I'm going to
Mr.
ask my
Francis.
friend, Mrs. Smith, to come join me. I sadly left her name off of this item on the agenda. I apologize for that. This is the 2021 bond planned and proposed purchase. And I'm trying to grab my notes here real quick. There we go. So what we've got are 4 77-passenger, the typical large buses, 2 of which would be propane, 2 of which would be gasoline. I'm going to pause for a moment and say that the propane buses that we currently have, and we have 24 of them currently, so this would make it 26, have been a very big success. The same buses that we're proposing, the 2 buses that are propane, are the same manufacturer. These are the Bluebirds that has the partnership between Ford, Roush, and Bluebird to create them. Traditionally, and I had long conversations with Mr. Martin, so as Mrs. Oquist and Mrs. Smith, and the way he explains it, and he does a very nice job of it, is that most propane school buses that are out there get converted from gas to propane. And propane does not have lubricity, got to get that word out, like traditional fuels. So Roush and Ford came up with a plan, and Roush is really the key in this, that are making the propane bus in a manner, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm a mechanic, but in a manner that lubrication is not an issue in them where it breaks down the buses. Mr. Martin remembers when this district had propane buses in the 80s, and he knows how it used to be and realizes how far it's come. So I want to say, A, it's been a success. B, the reason I also give that background is if you look at the quotes on the propane buses, the quote that we are using, which is actually from the MSBO pricing, right? Which satisfies the board's requirements and duties on that. And we are taking the slightly higher price. It's about $10,000 more for those two buses than the other two companies. The reason is for a lot of what I just explained. The Bluebirds are what we have in our fleet. The way they've been put together is the way that generally speaking, most of the propane school buses are being done through the Ford, Roush, and Bluebird partnership. There are very few that are out there that are being made by other manufacturers because they're still doing the conversion in the previous method. Our mechanics are already working on those Bluebirds, so we have some of that knowledge currently with our own staff. So it is our recommendation that we continue with those same buses from Bluebird that is being manufactured by Ford and Roush in that partnership. And just a side note, we're in Livonia, literally Roush is right down the street. We've been able to say, hey, we've got a question, or we need a part to go over to the dealer to get this piece fixed, and they say that they don't have it. We'll have it there later today. You know, they're right here in our backyard, and that's somewhat tangential, but really
Doesn't hurt.
it does make it makes a difference. It is nice that they're in our backyard and we're in their backyard together. So when we look at those, the two gasoline that are the 77 passenger. You have a quote for that. That one actually was the low anyway. Again, we have almost exclusively Bluebirds in the fleet. The gasolines have been successful. Gasoline and propane versus diesel start up in winter very well. Diesel is actually the one that struggles to start up in those below zero temperatures. Then we have those very cold days. Mr. Martin has a philosophy that I agree with completely, to have multiple fueled. He does, diesel has been around for a very long time. This isn't to say we want to get rid of all of our diesel buses. We want to have 3 different options. So if there ever has something going wrong in one fuel, if you can't get propane, but you had an entirely propane fleet, what would you do? If diesel spikes like crazy, what would you do? So
In diesel, he was having trouble getting this year.
Yeah.
So
Yep, the diesel gets up.
diversified fleet makes a big difference.
And that price actually keeps going up while the gasoline and the propane have been starting to stabilize. The diesel continues to go up. So for all of these reasons, we bring this recommendation for those 2 types of vehicles. And then we have how many were we doing? 3? Yep. 3 of the 30-passenger minibuses that we also have for you. Do you want to discuss anything on the bond end of it?
Sure. So thankfully, we do have these purchases planned for in our 2021 bond. It's something that we began with the 2013 bond of having a regular replacement cycle for our buses. Prior to that, they were, kept for a very, very long time. So now we're getting on a regular replacement cycle. These buses, too, that they'll be replacing probably will have some residual value, so we do use an online auctioning system that brings some money back into the district that helps offset these costs. And again, we'll be planning to bring purchases before the board for consideration every year to keep our fleet as up-to-date as possible. We are working with Rick and our transportation supervisor too, looking at the number of vehicles number of buses that we have, looking at the number of routes that we have to make sure that we're keeping the right amount of buses. And there is some talk that we probably can pare our fleet size down a little bit. So we'll be working on that this coming year too. So
He already intends to have about 10% sent to auction. And these are the ones that we purchased in 13 that were 2014 buses when we first had that 2013 bond.
Great. Mrs. Bird.
And referring to the replacement cycle, for many, many years, the district had been on a regular replacement cycle. And when we hit the 2008 recession, and some of us were on the board through that period of time, that's when purchases such as continuous replacement of our school buses had to be halted. And I'm thankful that we're now able to get back on a schedule where we're doing that regular replacement again. Thankfully that we made it through that last enormous recession. But it did. It had an enormous impact on replacing school buses, replacing some of our textbooks, which we're finally now getting back caught up with all that again. But it's nice to see that these are that we're once again able to go back to a regular replacement cycle.
Yep.
And hopefully our country will not see a recession like that last one in a long, long, long time, or for a long time.
And ultimately, getting on those regular replacement cycles helps our general fund, because as we know,
Yeah.
older vehicles take more to maintain, and those maintenance costs are coming out of our general fund, so that's a help to our general fund.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. I appreciate the fact that they're mixing the different fuels, no pun intended. Because, and just today, looking at one of the gas stations, there was a $2 difference between a gallon of gas and a gallon of diesel. So to have the staggered types of fuels, I think is an outstanding idea, and I appreciate that very much.
The true cost differential actually comes in with the maintenance too. The diesels
Right.
cost so much more to maintain than the gasoline and the propanes. Just because of the way the system works internally, there's more that has to be done for preventative as well as the cleanup, if you will, from the way the system works to clean the diesel.
Yeah, I'm assuming that all those diesels run on glow plugs too, as opposed to spark plugs, which is a totally different maintenance as well.
And speaking of different varieties, there is, we're also investigating electric, which is becoming, growing more and more. There's a grant out there. The district is, we are eligible. We have the status of eligible under that grant and not priority. So priority districts get a larger amount towards going electric. If we happen to go and move from the eligible to priority, we are interested in perhaps trying it, like maybe 2 buses, something like that. But the future is going to be there. How long that future takes, we don't know. But right now, we've got a good fleet. I mentioned this in the study session that Mr. Martin mentioned specifically. He thanks the board. He thanks that 2013 bond, just for what we were talking about, that we were able to get back to updating our fleet again. And right now, I think we're in a really good position.
If we were going to go, even if we were going to go 2 electric buses, Phil, would we have to put in a charging station?
Yeah, there's grants for both.
For both.
The bus as well as the infrastructure.
Okay.
With the grant too, like Phil had mentioned, there had a great reimbursement if you were considered a priority district, which we weren't. So it definitely, there's some silver linings to us maybe not being included in this round 1. We have a lot of neighboring districts that are going for those grants. We're considered priority districts, and I think we can learn from them. They'll get some buses in their fleet, and I'm sure that our mechanics will be talking to their mechanics and, what worked well and what do they wish they had known before they had gotten them. So there's some benefits to waiting on them.
Great. Mrs. Burner?
I completely agree that there's the validity in having a mix of the propane, the diesel, the gas. But if the districts, or rather if the diesels are becoming that much more problematic, do you foresee us kind of weaning ourselves off of those? Or are they still valuable enough that even with their difficulties, they still have enough value to be competitive in our fleet with propane and gas?
Yeah, I think with the diversification, it play there is one thing. To keep having that diversified fleet and starting to move, we were very heavy diesel. We're now starting to get, we're not there at a third, and a third yet. It's still the heavier number. But I think as we roll through selling off some of the older ones, we'll get a little bit closer to that, a third, and a third. And also, diesel still is running. Any large rig, diesel still runs the world, so to speak, in that sense. And there's the other organizations find value in them, they use them, et cetera. So we can also always have a market on on the secondary. Frankly, I think the gasoline's been very successful as well, just because it doesn't have the maintenance issues that the diesel does, and the cold start is a nice piece as well. But gasoline can be very volatile as well in its pricing. I mean, most anything can now. Propane was very steady for many, many, many years, and it's a zero emission item. So that's also very attractive to us.
Okay.
And did Mr. Martin say that the more current diesels do not have the
Yeah.
issues that the older diesels? So we still do have some older diesels in our fleet, but the more current diesels do not have some of those same issues with regard to needing to run out the systems
He
in
struggled.
the same way.
The buses that we got from the 13 bond they're great buses, and again, they're updated, new, but there were some issues that when they were still under warranty was okay, and because thousands of dollars were being not spent by us, but would have cost for some of those repairs, and now that they're out of warranty, I think getting an update of some of those, as Mrs. Oakwood just said, would be very important, because
Okay.
the technology kept changing even on those diesels.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Regular agenda?
Thanks.
Great, thank
Can I add one more thing? I'm not sure if we already covered it, but I think Phil mentioned that we were getting the buses through the
Oh,
MSBO
that's right.
purchasing
Yep,
program.
yep.
So those are for our 77 passenger buses. They're having supply chain issues producing the minibuses, so they're not even being included on the MSBO purchasing program anymore. So we did reach out, and we're getting quotes for those buses so that we can meet that requirement for competitive bids. But that will not be through the MSBO purchasing program. And we are finding out, Rick's already reached out to 3 companies. We've gotten the one quote back that we've included it for the pricing for the board. That one has availability that we could receive those in 8 months. The other companies we've reached out to, we haven't even gotten pricing from yet, but they've told us the delivery date on these would be very far off. So we'd still like to document that we at least got a price from them, but for the very reason of the timing of it, I think it would make sense for us to go forward with the Bluebird from the Holland Bus Company for those minis.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. The Holland Bus Company is actually out of Quebec, Canada. They have the availability, and they're the ones that have the 6 to 8 month lead time on saying that a lot of this is a chassis problem, according to Mr. Martin. And he literally told me today that he talked to one of the higher-ups at one company who he asked a quote for, and he just said, no, I'm not even going to bother giving you a quote. Another company said, we can get you a quote. It's not going to be any good because it's not until 2024 that you'll get it, and the pricing's going to change by then. So
that's not really a quote.
what's the value of, right? So it's kind of where we're at in that spot. So we've done due diligence on, I mean, the whole point of putting something out for bid or to gather quotes is to say, we want to get as much information as possible. The information we're getting is that in the US, nothing's really available until 2024. We were fortunate that Holland Bus Company, it's called Microbird of Canada, I believe is the name. So it's still the same Holland Bus Company. They have availability.
Excellent.
Mrs. Bonfield.
Just as a reminder, though, when we start to talk about this, we're not just randomly paying whatever price. We're still, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that they're sending it just because we can't get buses from other places. We're still looking for a reasonable price and value for what we're buying, that we're not just writing a blank check to for the minibuses just because they're the only ones that we can get.
Exactly.
And those quotes, even if they would run out for the 2024s, would still give us a good gauge of where we're at right now.
I just want to make sure people don't think from that conversation, we're just writing blank checks because it's the only place we can get it from.
Yep.
Yeah, one other clarifying thing, we were talking about full-size buses for this purchase that we are adding to the agenda. This is for a future consideration, correct?
The purchase tonight would be, yep.
Oh, the split purchase?
Yep.
Okay,
So it would be 4 of our conventional size buses, the 77 passenger, and then 3 of the mini buses.
Got
And
it.
the mini buses is the one they're just having supply chain issues getting them. So
Got
we
it.
still think it's obviously beneficial to get as many quotes as possible on them, but we'll factor in, of course, delivery timing and cost
great.
in our decision.
All right, thank you so much.
Yep.
That brings us to our last item, which is 3G, which is Dickinson abatement contingency. Mr. Francis.
Thank you very much. We talked a little bit about this in the study session. We'll go through it again, just to re-explain or review what we talked about. So Dickinson, the board had approved abatement work for Dickinson before it goes through full demo, where the Early Childhood Center will be located. And when Quality Environmental Services was in there doing the work, they actually unearthed some, they found, I shouldn't say unearthed, found some asbestos in the gymnasium where we have record of it not existing. And it really was, an abatement occurred years ago, and the overspray from the original application of the abatement, of the asbestos still exists, and it's scattered throughout the gymnasium at Dickinson. So it's a very large area, which takes quite a bit of labor to seal up, contain before they do their work. So it's the amount of contingency that we had on the original plan is not enough. So we did get from Quality Environmental Services a total amount for time and materials not to exceed $65,000. So that is more than the amount that we have in our contingency. So I want to come back and talk to the board about, we had about $28,000 in contingency, so we clearly need a little bit more than twice that to get this job done. We certainly need to get the job done. Quality Environmental Services has done a nice job. They've finished what they originally set out to do. They would need to remobilize and come back to do this work, but knowing that they've worked with us, they said they are going to waive the mobilization fee that's normally associated with coming out to do an abatement job. So at this point, we're in a position where we need to move forward, but I can't move forward without the board's approval and finishing that job in the gymnasium at Dickinson. It was unforeseen. Our records indicated that it was a cleared area previously, about a decade ago, the work was done. And the progress at this point has been completed by Quality based upon the original scope, but we want to make sure that we have it completely cleared before we turn it over to Clark for the demolition.
Great. This does happen when you open up things. We've seen this before, so we got to make sure that it's done correctly, so appreciate the effort. Does anyone have any questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Francis. We'll put this on the regular agenda then?
Please.
Thank you. All right, that concludes building and site.
Thank you.
We are at the item 4 curriculum committee. No microphone. We are on to item 4 curriculum committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Burton. Our first item 4A, is our sequence of high school math courses, and we'll have Ms. O'Brien and Mr. Hillard.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time and update you on our plan for moving forward to having all 3 of our high schools on the same math sequence for the 23-24 school year. As we've talked before, we are trying to create a guaranteed viable curriculum at all of our schools and have the opportunity this year for teams to meet in their district teams and then their PLTs in their building. And the unalignment in our high school has created, some conversations about what we're teaching in specifically 9th and 10th grade when students come to our high schools. 5 years ago, Churchill High School asked to move to the more typical sequence of Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 from what we had currently been teaching. And we granted them that time to shift their sequence with the plan of collecting some data to look at how that pilot worked. With COVID and everything else, we are behind in looking at that data, and when it's come down to wanting to create that guaranteed viable curriculum, there wasn't one specific data point at any of the high schools that made that sequence stand out. Instead, what we looked at is our district data. Our SAT math data has been flat since we moved to the SAT. So we felt like this would be a good opportunity to dig into the benefits of one of the sequences, which would make the most sense. So Mr. Itu and myself met with the principals. We met with the chairs. I offered teachers listening sessions to share their thoughts, but we've made the decision we're going forward with an Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 sequence. And some of the data points that we have talked with teachers about is that that sequence is the most typical according to NAEP. Most of the country uses that. All of our neighbors, Novi, Northville, Farmington, Plymouth, Canton, and Wayne Westland, all utilize that sequence. We have researched that students who have access to Algebra 1 are able to use that math in chemistry and physics. So Algebra 1 in 9th grade, we typically teach chemistry in sophomore year, 10th grade. The Envision textbook series we purchased in 2016 and 2017 was written in the Algebra, Geometry, Algebra 2 sequence. We also feel that with our focus on mascot time, students coming out of 8th grade are in pre-algebra. It would be a good opportunity at 9th grade for our intervention classes to be focused on that continuum of algebra. And one last data point is most of our accelerated students already follow this sequence. They take algebra in 8th grade, then geometry in 9th, and algebra 2 in 10th. So we already have a group of students at all 3 of our high schools that follow this. So our plan is to move forward for the 23-24 school year. We know that this is a change and this is hard. Some of our teachers have worked really hard in the sequence that they have been teaching for the last 15 years or more, and that, you know, they are not all happy with this, but we feel like this is the right way to go in order to build that guaranteed viable curriculum.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Any questions? President Burton.
Just a comment, and we discussed this in the study session, but one of the most significant things to me from our discussion was the fact that this sets kids up to have algebra. At least the majority of them will be having algebra in 9th grade, and then when they're going on into chemistry and other higher level courses in 10th through 12th grade, they have that basis of algebra underneath them that they will need to succeed in some of those other courses. So if putting these math classes in this order helps them to be more successful in some of their other classes that they're taking, then I think it's a very significant argument, in my opinion.
Yes. It gives them that access to algebra to utilize in our science classes, which they do utilize.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. We'll move on.
Do we vote on this?
No.
Information.
Yep. We're not changing the graduate. Just to clarify, the answer to that is no, because we're not changing the graduation requirements. We're just ordering the sequence of classes, so that does not require board approval.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 4B, Labor Day waiver.
Mrs. O'Brien and Mr. Hillard, sorry.
Yes, Mr. Hillard and I are going to share with you the process for applying to start school before Labor Day. There is a waiver we will be applying for, and as you know, part of our negotiations last spring is that we were looking to start school prior to Labor Day. We determined we would not do that for this school year so that we could go through the process of finding out what needed to be done for the waiver and provide our community the time, once we applied for the waiver, to be prepared that we would be planning to start school prior to Labor Day for the fall of 2023. And so Mr. Hillard and I will walk you through what's required for the Labor Day waiver.
Right. Well, thank you. So the first thing we need to do is fill out an online waiver or an online request for approval. There are certain criteria that you need to meet. Ours would be based on our summer programming that we offer. So we have to answer questions, what we offer, what the program has, and how do we measure its effectiveness. Once we do all that, we have a meeting, a joint meeting where the MDE, the Board of Education person from it, will listen in and listen to any questions that our community has and just make sure that's all on there. We've chosen some dates in January that we are going to put on there. You need to put 3 dates on there, and then they let us know which one they have availability. So we are looking at January 17th, January 23rd, and January 30th to then answer questions for our community and talk about it with anybody that's interested as far as stakeholders.
So they'll determine which one of those dates they're available to listen in, but we would offer a public meeting prior to a board meeting on those 3 dates. We figured that was a convenient day and time people in our community knew. We would have, be here in this room available for questions about it, and then they would be listening in on which of those 3 dates that they are available. So we don't have to offer 3 meeting dates. We have to offer, as our application for the waiver, a choice of 3 dates, and then they will listen in to our public comment.
Do we know how long they will take to make the determination of which date so that we're able to share that information with our community?
On the application, it says you must pick dates 2 weeks from, so I would figure that 2-week window, they'll let us know.
Okay.
So our timeline for this would be to share with you at the board, and then submit the waiver request. We would be able to inform you and our community when that date for the public hearing would be. And then they would inform us whether our waiver was accepted. It is our understanding that most school districts are accepted, their waiver is accepted. And then we would begin to plan how to support our community with shifting to starting before Labor Day.
Ms. Bonnefield?
Oh, how are we planning on disseminating this information that there's a public meeting to to our, to parents and caregivers so that they have the opportunity to?
Yep. So we'll utilize Mrs. Jenkins' email blast for the district, our website, our schools. We'll push it out to our schools. So that was one of the things we thought by presenting to you in early December, that would give us over a month of time, sometime before Christmas, and then after break, we'd have some time to push it out again to inform parents that we are having this public meeting. So we thought this was enough time that we could get it out in multiple formats.
President Byrne?
So the proposed change then would be, rather than starting the Tuesday after Labor Day, we'd be starting on the Monday before Labor Day. And again, we talked about this in the study session, but our public has not heard this portion yet. We would be starting the Monday before Labor Day, the students would go to school Monday through Thursday. We would still have a 4-day Labor Day weekend break. So we'd have Friday and Monday off, and then return to school that following Tuesday again. And then on the flip side, on the June side of it, we would be, our last day of school that year would be, Mrs. Oakes, did you say it was, or one of you said?
Somewhere around June 7th.
Around June, okay, June 7th roughly, as opposed to, this year it was June 16th, I believe.
16th, 17th.
So we're taking that week that we had pushed into June and bringing it back into the beginning of the school year.
Yes, so students, there still is the state law that there's no school on the Friday before Labor Day. You have to have a 4-day weekend. So students would have 4 days of school prior to Labor Day, and then a 4-day week when we came back from Labor Day. So then that would allow us to end school earlier. One of the other questions you asked at study session would be, the expectation is that we are working towards having all of our schools air conditioned. And this past summer, we, had some supply chain issues, but we are prepared for this summer to, have that ready to go for the end of August.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
No.
I know that was, the AC was the first thing that popped into my mind, that I know families were expecting that to have happened this summer. They were looking forward to some of the schools being ready for that, and we had to remind them that, there's a lag in the work getting completed, so we appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay.
This is information only, right?
moving on to item 4C, index scores.
Yes, thank you. Our last item for curriculum committee is to share with you a little bit about our school index scores. So the state of Michigan has an accountability index score that is given to each school. It is not by district, it is by school building. It is, we have not had one in 3 years, since 2019, because of the COVID pandemic. This score is broken into sections, and each section has its own score with its own weight. And although there is an overall index score, one of the powers of this particular accountability measure was that it did take into account both proficiency and growth, and some of the areas that we have some control over. It wasn't just an overall school grade, which we have another accountability measure for school grades. So the state of Michigan has grades, our index scores, our annual education reports, in addition to collecting some of our data. This particular accountability measure targets schools that are not meeting what the state of Michigan has identified as high enough in improvement or proficiency. And before Mr. Hillard and I explain the parts of the index score, we do not have any schools that have been identified. We had one school 3 years ago, and that has come off of the list as having a targeted support system that is needed. So these scores came out last week publicly. They were opened 2 weeks early to school districts to review, and we have found some things in there that we want to share with you. But first, I'm going to ask Mr. Hillard to kind of explain each section.
Okay, thank you. There are 6 sections, and each of them is weighted a little bit differently. In each of the sections, there's a target that the state would like school districts to hit, as well as each of their subgroups that has at least 30 students in it. So the targets for each are based on the 2016-17 school year, and they are the 75th percentile of the state of Michigan. So this is the state's effort to raise the average up to what was previously the 75th percentile as part of their goals to improve our schools in Michigan. So the first category is proficiency, and that is 29% of the overall weight. They look at M-STEP, SAT, and MyAccess for ELA and math. The next category is growth, and that is 34% of the weight. That is the most heavily weighted, and that's for ELA and math. This year, our K-4 schools do not have a growth score because those students have not taken a test that is counted for this. Our 5th grade students also do not have a growth score. Because those schools the K-4s do not have a growth score, that 34% is then redistributed amongst all the other factors. So it's increasing our other factors' weight more than usual. Assessment participation is worth 2%. The state's goal is always 95% of students, and 95% of each subgroup participate in all tests. Graduation rate for our high schools is 10%, and that looks at 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year graduation rates. The cohorts, 4-year is weighted most heavily. The target for that is 94.4% of students graduating in 4 years. English learner progress is 10% of the weight. And then the last one I want to talk about is a school quality and student success overview, because that has the most components in it. That is 14% of the overall weight. The thing in there for all schools is on-track attendance. So that is the percent of students that are not considered chronically absent. To be considered chronically absent, you need to be enrolled in school at least 10 days. And if you've missed more than 10% of the enrolled days, you would be considered chronically absent. So the goal for the state for the index scores is 92.37% of students not chronically absent. This is the one that last year we declined the most, and we know due to COVID and quarantine and other issues, our attendance last year was lower than normally. And that's why this year, one of the big goals throughout our schools has been re-engaging the community and kind of getting back into that routine. Another factor in that category is successfully completing advanced coursework. So this is for 11th and 12th graders. So this is something that's in our high schools, but not in our other schools. The goal for that is 49.8% of students completing advanced coursework, and that's for all demographics as well. Post-secondary enrollment within 12 months is another factor in there. The goal for that is 74% of students enroll in a post-secondary program within 12 months of graduation. And again, each subgroup as well. And then for our K-8 buildings, these are for K-8, is access to arts and PE instruction and access to librarian and media specialists are factors that are included in there.
So both those areas are 4% of that school quality section. And during the 2-week time period that we had the ability to look before it became public, we noticed that we were down in this area and did some digging. And in our rep report that we 2 times a year review data from the state of Michigan, we have our media specialists identified but not linked to a grade band. So only one of our K-8 schools got the points for having a media specialist. So we lost a few points there. We also noticed that both Jackson Center, they were listed as not having access to art and PE. They also were hit pretty hard with their attendance, and so there's some digging we need to look at. We have identified at Jackson Center that they have 98 kindergartners because we have the Young Fives program. And a few years ago, we started adding them as a part of our school improvement data, but we realize this might not be the right metric to count them equal to a K-12 school when a % of their students are Young Fives, the rest of their students are preschool students, and so that data isn't even part of an index score. And the last school that we noticed under school quality is our Career Technical Center. They got no points for having access to a media specialist. They had no advanced coursework or post-secondary, which doesn't make sense since those are our students and we have them identified at their home high school. And so again, our Career Technical Center is a program. It is also a school, but it's something we need to look at how we report to the state what goes in there. So that information was a miss on ours. We haven't done this in 3 years, and as we looked at it, it was just open for us to make changes right now, but we couldn't make changes for this index score that was supposed to have happened in June, and it didn't happen. So we've made the changes and reviewed it right now, and then we'll make sure in June that it is correct.
Mr. Hillard, you had mentioned that the standard within the school quality index for post-secondary would be, I think, 74% enrolled in post-secondary. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a way if we could find out if that includes students who are part of an apprenticeship program? I know the state has really focused on college and career ready, and so I think it's a bit limiting to if they're only looking at enrollment in post-secondary programs, meaning collegiate programs. So is it possible if we could find out if there would be credit if we are able to determine that a student is in a workforce development program beyond high school or in an apprentice program?
Yes, we can look that up. I have the document here, but it would take me a while to find out.
No,
what it is. Yeah,
that's
but
fine.
we
I would be
can-
curious if we could
can definitely-
advocate for that at the state level.
Because I agree, it should include that, and usually this talks about students getting their data from the National Student Clearinghouse, and it says showed enrolled in either a 2 or 4-year institution, but I don't see where it says apprenticeship program, so we can
Okay.
ask for that and look a little further.
In the 92.3 not chronically absent, those are a by school, correct, over the course of the year? So
Correct.
that's calculated out and then by school. Do they do anything by district or just by school?
That's,
Nope, go
Okay, I was gonna say, that's by school and also by subgroup within the school. So not only the school has to meet that, but each subgroup also has to meet that target.
Okay. If one subgroup doesn't make it, then you don't get the full credit for
You
that,
lose
correct?
points.
Okay.
It's weighted for all, and then for each subgroup, that
Okay.
you have 30 or more students.
And the subgroups weight equally, so even if I have 400 students in one subgroup and 32 in another, they still have the, whatever their number is the same weight.
I thought you shared something interesting that maybe if we could share at this, in this meeting. You had talked about schools that teeter on having a population count as a subgroup and those that don't, and the impact that could have. Could you share that with the group?
Yes, definitely. The subgroup count for them to be included in the index score is 30. 30 students, in our K-4 buildings especially, because our student count is a little lower, we always have several subgroups that are right on the borderline. From one year to the next, they may have over 30 or under 30, and sometimes that causes quite a bit of fluctuation in some of the scores when we dig in, when we say what was different, and really, everything may have been identical, it's just this group counted in this index calculation this year and didn't count a previous year. So sometimes that can cause us to go up or go down where it looks like something big has changed, but really, it could just be one or two kids have moved out of your school that fit that subgroup, or one or two kids have moved in. So sometimes it really takes some digging into this to know what does impact these scores, and even things as simple as the weight being redistributed because we didn't have growth really makes it look a lot different as well.
So we can have a cohort of English learners and someone places out of, they test out, right? For instance, and then that would change that subgroup.
Yeah.
Yep. When you look through our K-4 numbers, there's a lot that are 29 or 33, and it's just from one school to the next, it's like, well, this is a factor in this school where it's, and we should always be looking at those groups and those kids, but it's sometimes the way it changes your index score is a little, it's a little skewed, or it seems different from year to year. It just goes up and down, a little more erratic than if it was always counted, it would look.
So just to recap, overall, what, like the index scores, how does it overall impact us as a district?
So it's one of the measures that is out there on My School Data that anyone in the community, has access to. We would suggest you dig in and understand what those scores are. One of the things I shared with you, our scores over the last several years, but again, to boil it down to one score isn't necessarily a true look at how that school's strengths and challenges are with the different measures, and each one of the measures is, weighted differently. So I think it is another snapshot of a school and areas that they're doing well and areas that they might need to improve upon. Like many of our data pieces, it's something, like I read at the beginning of this particular one, the state of Michigan says it's a good tool for school improvement teams to dig in and look at how they are doing at meeting the needs of their students and their subgroups as a whole, each group.
Yes, the state, they need it to comply with the federal requirements where you have to have something to identify schools that need extra supports. So that's one purpose that the state needs it. They recommend that school districts use it for program evaluation and school improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes our curriculum committee report.
Thank you. That brings us to our item 5, Finance Committee, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you, President Burton. Mrs. Smith has 3 items for us tonight. We're going to start with the 22-23 budget amendment.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Mr. Francis is passing out for us the budget book for us to go over, as well as a one-piece summary of our general fund. Wait till everybody has that. So the first adjustment we've made to the general fund budget is an update to the beginning fund balance based on where we ended the school year last year. So we started the school year off with $33.7 million in our fund balance. I'm estimating revenues to be $163 million, expenditures to be $167.3 million, and I expect our ending fund balance to be $29.4 million or 17.6%. So while we have some changes to the revenue and expenditures, which we'll go over, you can see overall our ending fund balance percentage hasn't changed an awful lot from our what was included in our proposed budget. So with that, I'll take us through our budget book. The first page of our budget book is our general fund revenue, and I'll give you some details by category. You can see in our first amendment, I'm proposing an increase in local revenue of almost $1.9 million. The largest shift was a Wayne Risa reimbursement, which will be familiar to the board. You'll recall that they did not include in their proposed budget the reimbursement of non-Act 18 special ed costs. We received it for the first time last year. They conservatively did not want to include it in their proposed budget. They have since added it to their budget, and we've been able to now add it to our budget. So that Wayne reimbursement is for 3 different special ed categories or reimbursements. We receive a reimbursement for them for our Independence Parapros. We also get a reimbursement for special education transportation costs, and then now this non-Act 18 special ed costs that are received in the general fund. So the net increase to our general fund for the local line is about $1 million. The other increase in the local funds was for property taxes. We continue to see our property tax values increase, so that creates a shift. Our foundation allowance is made up of partly funds that we collect locally through the property taxes and then partly what we're getting through the state education fund. So when we get to the state section, we'll see a reduction in the state aid, but offset by that increase in property taxes. And then we have roughly $120,000 just of miscellaneous adjustments to those local revenue lines. It's in that local revenue category that we account for our fees from SAC program and from the Jackson Center, as well as facility use and athletic event receipts and whatnot. On the state side, there's an adjustment down, a net adjustment of $657,000, and I'll walk through what makes up each one of those changes. In our proposed budget, we included a per pupil increase of $600, and as you recall, we talked about this, I believe, in August when we had gotten the updated budget from the state in July. What we actually saw as a per pupil increase was $450, so it was $150 less per pupil than what was included in our proposed budget. As you'll recall, we had a discussion that if our fund balance was not where it was, we wouldn't have been able to budget as aggressively. And because we have the fund balance, we put a little bit more towards that foundation allowance. We didn't see it through the form of a foundation allowance, but we did receive other categoricals. So we don't have to recognize that full $150 per pupil decrease. I don't think I said the dollar amount. That dollar amount equates for $1.9 million. The change between $450 and $600 per pupil increase. The other adjustment was our student enrollment decline. We had budgeted to be down 100 students, and we are down more than that, so I had to do the revenue for that, which is a loss of $465,000. I do know for our January agenda, we'll be having a presentation on student enrollment, so we can see exactly where those students were lost. As mentioned in the local revenue line, we're receiving more through the property taxes, so that shifts some of the foundation allowance to the local line out of the state aid. So that was a shift of $305,000. Well, you can see for what I just mentioned, it was actually a $700,000 shift, but it was offset by increases in other categorical lines. One of the larger changes we saw was an increase to our 147C revenue. That is what we receive. It's for the UAL. It's the unfunded portion of the state pension system. That's the line that what they send us in revenue, we have to cut right away to the Office of Retirement Services. So we don't actually get to use those funds to offset our costs. Instead, we actually have to increase our costs to match what the revenue is that we've received. So we'll see that when we get to the expenditure line. But that was a $1.1 million increase in 147C. And then the last adjustment was an increase in our special ed reimbursement. In this 22-23 budget, the state eliminated the Section 51F categorical, which was a new one that got added last year for the 21-22 school year, and it was a 3% increase in the reimbursement rate. And instead, they put that money towards Section 51E, which is now 75% of the foundation allowance times our number of special ed FTEs. So it was an increase for us. I had budgeted for an increase of $1.5 million in special ed reimbursement, and it's actually $2.5 million of special ed reimbursement. So that's another $1 million going towards our unfunded special education costs. So overall, again, we see a decrease in the state line of about $657,000. And then small adjustments on the federal side. That was an increase in Medicaid reimbursement we saw last year, so I'm adjusting our budget to reflect that would continue for this year. And then a slight increase in our other financing sources, and the primary reason for that is an increase in indirect costs that we're getting from our grant. So that's coming from our funded projects fund.
Mrs. Smith, do you mind if I hop in
Of
for a
course.
moment? I know we gave to the board, and just for any of our community members who are listening, the dollar amount, but we had projected to be down about 100 students, and I believe I shared with you that we were down 124. So very, very close in the overall population, but we certainly do have to recognize that difference. So if anyone was following that, they got the dollar amount. I just wanted to be sure that we also shared the total student loss, and then as Mrs. Smith said, Mrs. Keats will give us a deeper overview in January.
Okay, so with that, with the total revenue we're estimated to collect this year, as well as what our beginning fund balance, we have $196.6 million available to appropriate this school year. So with that, we'll move on to our expenditure page for the general fund. And again, cutting down to the very bottom, you can see overall the fund balance is in line with where we thought we would be for this school year, but we've had some shifts in our expenditures. The first one and largest one being the increase in retirement costs due to that 147C revenue coming into the district. So we had to budget another $1.1 million worth of retirement costs. Largely, you'll see that in the basic programs line under instruction. That's where a bulk of our salaries are. Those are instructional staffs, our elementary, middle school, and high school teaching staff. Another adjustment you'll see on here, I'll draw your attention to the middle of the page, are the two lines, the community services and the other financing uses. We were really fortunate to learn that we were going to be the recipients of a second round of child care stabilization grant. And so we were able to, or are able to pay for some staff costs out of that grant again this year. So we had budgeted in June that we wouldn't get the grant and that we would be charging all of the salaries back to the general fund as we historically have. But we've gotten grant dollars that we can shift those child care staff costs to. So we're proposing to decrease the community services expenditures, but then put that money that we're saving in that line item to a transfer to our capital projects fund, and that's what you see on the other financing uses line. That's similar to what we did in the 21-22 school year. As we've talked about with our bond, construction costs have definitely gone up, and we are looking for whatever ways we can to set aside money to help us with our construction projects. We're, of course, getting set to begin on construction for a new early childhood center, so we thought that this savings brought about by this child care grant, what a perfect use of those funds to put it towards our early childhood center. So again, that would be the transfer that we see to the capital projects fund. The next shift causing an overall increase in our costs, and again, primarily on that basic programs line, the instruction, are some unrecognized retirement savings. So every year we look back on how many retirees we've had for the last several years and take an average of that, and then we build some retirement savings into our budgets. We used an estimate of 24 retirements for this coming school year, or I should say that we would have seen last year and then recognized the savings in this school year. Instead of 24, we saw 21. So that's three less staff that we are saving funds on, so we had to add that back into the budget. And then another shift we saw, as we're replacing our retirees, we're seeing an increase in the cost of new staff because we are fortunate to be getting some staff with experience, and so we're recognizing that experience. So where we used to budget for the savings to be roughly $60,000 per FTE for a retiring employee to be replaced by a newer employee, now that savings is more in the line with $40,000 per pupil, so, or I'm sorry, per FTE. So that was an increase back to our general fund. The next item too is there's some shifts. We've been very fortunate to receive some grants, some of them from the federal government to address the pandemic. We're also seeing additional grants coming from the state for mental health supports and whatnot. So we also are proposing this First Amendment to have some staff that were being funded previously out of some grants to shift back to the general fund so that we can try to evenly spend our grants over the next few years. We don't want to use too much of it in one year and then not have the same amount available for us in that final year, which will be next year. So that's a shift. And then the last one was just some, we've added some additional English language learning staff, instructional staff to our district. We continue to apply for grants. I know we have a grant application out right now for some, maybe some grant funding to help us cover those costs, but for now, I've included those in our general fund budget. So that was a lot of information there. I'll pause before we move on to the next one, just to see if there's any questions so far.
Questions, guys?
Okay. Our next page is our funded projects fund. Just a reminder, when this is looked at on our audit or when we're reporting up our financials to the state, they view our funded projects fund as part of our general fund. But for tracking's sake, we find it helpful to have those in a separate fund. So the first thing I'll point out is what we covered in October on our financial statement. You can see the ending fund balance last year was actually a negative $877,000. You recall that was just a timing issue with a cash request for one of the grants. It didn't get received in August, it got received in September, so we couldn't recognize the revenue last year. So we start this year with a negative fund balance, but obviously now we've gotten the money so we can recognize that revenue. So you can see for this year, now our ending fund balance will be back to zero, which is where it normally ends. A few grants that I'll point out for you. The first couple under the state sources, that Section 31AA, a per pupil allocation for mental health support, so that's $1.4 million. So I've been working with Dr. Terriel and the cabinet team to put those grant funds to good use. On the next line item down, we also are receiving a Section 31N6 mental health grant. And the other one I wanted to mention, which is kind of newer to our district, was Section 54D early on. That used to be something, it is something, I should say, that is managed by our county. And previously, our early on kids, so this would be kids birthed through almost 3 years old who have maybe some identified special needs and need some support, they were getting serviced by another district. And RISA gave us the option to actually hire some early on staff ourselves so that we could service our kids here in the Livonia boundary, so we've done that. We have 2 early on teachers, and you'll see an increase on that line item, and that's so that we can hire an additional occupational therapist and an additional physical therapist to address the needs of our early on kids in our community. The last grant I'll point out is, again, what we just discussed on the general fund side, it's that child care grant under federal sources. We received just under $1.4 million last year. We didn't originally include another round of it this year, but we've fortunately gotten about $1.5 million in funding for our child care program. You may recall, I think it was just just last month, we brought some, a furniture purchase too for our SAC program, and so it's neat to be able to do some things too with these grant funds in addition to helping cover some of the staff costs. With that, I'll move on to our special education fund. Primarily on here, I'll say two updates I want to draw your attention to. Obviously, we've updated the beginning fund balance for our special education fund, and I want to point out the transfers to other funds. We just learned within the last week or two that Wayne Risa is going to give us a new reimbursement. They're recognizing that districts that operate a separate facility, such as our work skills, what's housed over at Garfield, that you're incurring some additional costs as a standalone building that you wouldn't be incurring if it was just maybe a couple classrooms in a building. So they are going to be, or have reimbursed us for $620,000 for operating that separate facility. As you know, we'll have some work coming up at Garfield as part of our 2021 bond. So what we're proposing in this amendment is to shift that rent payment out of the special education fund and move that to the capital projects fund so that we can use that for some construction projects that we have planned coming up in the next few years.
Everybody still okay?
Yes.
Okay.
The next page shows our debt retirement funds. So this is where we track when the community does approve a bond project, the repayment of those bonds gets captured here in our debt retirement fund. The only change, we knew, of course, what our debt payments were for this school year, so no change needed there, just a simple update of the beginning fund balance for the school year. Moving on to our next page, another rather straightforward one. This is our 2021 bond. The beginning fund balance has been updated, and you'll see some good news. Interest income has gone up based on what we've received the first couple months, so that's fantastic to recognize some additional revenue coming in. And also a shift, originally what was included in expenditures for facility improvements was $40 million. We've finished more of the summer 2022 work after June 30th, so that's a shift of the cost from the what we thought would be completed in 21 to the 22-23 school year. So you can see our ending fund balance as of this school year is about $1.7 million. And that's perfect because one of the items we'll be covering later tonight is the sale of the second series of bonds. So most likely for our final amendment, assuming that the board is supportive of selling those bonds, we'll create a new fund to track our 2023 bond expenditures. Our next page is our sinking fund. We've gone ahead and updated the beginning fund balance for the sinking fund. One other item of note is under the other financing sources. We received almost $100,000 reimbursement for, or a rebate, I should say, related to the boilers that we have been replacing. So that was pretty neat. And because those boilers were paid for out of the sinking fund, we put that rebate into our sinking fund. And then the only other shift here, again, some additional work completed after June 30th, so shifting those costs from 21-22 to 22-23. So overall, expecting to spend roughly $10.6 million this school year out of the sinking fund. Our next fund to discuss is our capital projects fund. On this fund, we updated the beginning fund balance and also updated the transfer from other funds. So right now, I'm budgeting $1,520,000, $900,000 coming from our general fund because of that child care grant, and then $620,000 coming from our special education fund. So that's the update on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, in the proposed budget, I had included $3 million, but really now that we're halfway through the school year, we do not have any major renovations planned for this school year. The one project we are working on is one of our outbuildings here on the central office complex. So we've budgeted some money for that, and then also just a general kind of a placeholder in case any other needed projects come up for the school year. But you can see that leaves us with an ending fund balance this year of just under 3.7. So that'll be very helpful with us as we continue on with our bond projects and are looking for other revenue streams to pay for those projects. Next up, we have our food service fund. Just two items of note. We updated the beginning fund balance and also just a slight increase for expenditures. And that would be utilizing some of our fund balance to purchase the equipment that's going into our renovated kitchens. So we've budgeted for that. And then on the health and welfare fund, I've updated the beginning fund balance and then updated revenues and expenditures based on our year-to-date activity and some information that we have regarding open enrollment. That takes us to our last page and two rather straightforward funds. Our scholarship fund, no changes to revenue and expenditures in that fund, simply an update to the beginning fund balance. And that is the same case with our school activities fund, an update to the beginning fund balance on that, and no change to the revenue and expenditures.
Any questions? I know, it's like kind of drinking from a fire hose, so, I know there haven't been a ton of questions. Remember that we'll go over this at our next regular meeting. If you have any questions, that pop into your mind, you have the document in.
Are we going over this at the
It would be, we'd bring it for your vote at the December meeting,
Okay.
but of course, if you do have questions.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so this will be on the regular.
Okay, and so, if you have any questions, is it okay if everyone reaches out directly to Allison? And then Allison, if have any requests that, you may or may not feel, you can either reach out to, reach out to Mrs. Burton or Mrs. Oakwest to verify that, and then obviously, in our packets, if there's any questions, normally Mrs. Smith will update us in our packets so that we all have the same information for the next meeting. And, of course, she can also answer questions at the next business meeting as well.
Thank you.
I know it's a lot of information to cover.
And I can't believe I almost forgot one important thing that we say at every budget amendment, and you didn't hear tonight. I will remind you, our ending fund balance of the 17.6% is within the MSBO recommended range for fund balance. For those at home, the MSBO is the Michigan School Business Officials. So it's an organization that studies, studies the idea of school finances, and come up with a recommended percentage to keep as a fund balance, so that you can weather unexpected changes in state funding, or, it also helps us with our credit rating, also helps us to keep from having to do any cash flow borrowing. So again, they recommend 15 to 20%, and this budget that I'm recommending puts us right at 17.6, so squarely in the middle of that range.
Very nice. Terrific. Very nice. Okay. One last chance for questions on A. We're moving to B. B is the summer tax resolution.
Thank you. This one is a rather straightforward one, nothing new. We have historically and recommend continuing with a 50% summer levy and a 50% winter levy. So I've worked with Troon, our law firm, who will have a resolution ready for the board pack for the regular meeting. And with your approval, we'll continue that practice of a 50-50 tax levy.
Any questions? Consent agenda, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then we're marching on to C, sale of the second series of the 21 bond.
Last but not least, so it is so exciting to see this work that we saw tonight and see those projects that are underway and planned for this coming school year. As we saw in the budget, we're just winding down on our 2021 bond proceeds, so we're ready to issue our next sale. So again, I've worked with Troon, who has developed a resolution for the board to consider for approval at our next regular meeting. That'll authorize the school district to then sell bonds. We're looking to sell not more than $70 million in this next series. We'll continue to work with PFM, who's our financial advisors, and Troon, our law firm. We are still narrowing down our underwriter. For the last number of bonds, that has been JP Morgan Chase. They've done a wonderful job for us, just to make sure we're all, that we're getting good coverage. We are getting requests for proposals from a few underwriter companies, just to make sure that JP Morgan continues to be a good value for the district. Again, we've worked with them before, and they've done an outstanding job for us. So That'll, I'll say, be most likely the underwriter that we're recommending, but we'll know that for sure and include that information for you for the next meeting. Similar to what we did for the 2021 bond, we are recommending a negotiated sale. We think that'll be provide the best value for us. And again, the term will be consistent with what it's been. Our last bond term, it was a 20-year bond, and this too will be 20-year bonds. So with the board's approval, we'll put that on the agenda for our regular meeting.
Anybody have any questions for that?
No.
Okay. And again, you'll give us a little more of a presentation at our next regular meeting, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, with probably a little more updated information.
That sounds, for our bond, making
Yeah,
sure? Yep.
yeah, okay.
Yep, that sounds good.
Anything else? Then that will conclude finance. Thank you so much, Mrs.
Thank you.
Smith.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over, we're at item 6, Policy Committee, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. We do have a couple of policy amendments tonight, and Mrs. O'Brien will help us with that. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I have 4 policies that I would like to bring to be updated. I'm going to start with IDDA, Instructional Programs, Special Education Programs. This board policy we rewrote, so the original is crossed off, and I will read for you the new one. The school district will provide eligible students with individualized education plans, programming, and services to meet their needs. These programs and services will be coordinated by the Department of Student Services and its staff. The district will abide by all applicable laws, including state and federal laws such as Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education and the Individuals with Disability Education Act.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to IDDD.
This-
DDDD.
DDD, instructional programs for the academically talented. We're changing the word gifted to academically talented. This, again, we've crossed off the original board policy and have rewritten it as follows. The school district will provide academically talented students access to learning opportunities both in general education classrooms and in magnet programs to meet their needs. These programs and services will be coordinated by the directors of elementary and secondary education with the support of the Academic Services Department. Staff may conduct studies and research to ascertain appropriate curricular and instructional opportunities and programming for academically talented students. And programming will be spelled correctly in the next copy.
Questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to II.
II.
The ayes have it.
The original II was titled Instructional Program System-Wide Standardized Testing Program, and it talked about the purposes for administering standardized testing to our students. IIA was instructional programs on testing programs, and it had a wider amount of assessments that we give our students. So I am proposing that we rewrite II to include IIA. And so it would be instructional program, system-wide assessment program, and the second program would not be lined out. And system-wide is one word. So the purpose of the system-wide assessment program is to plan appropriate instructional activities for each student in addition to providing the school district and each school essential information on the growth and achievement of our learners. The school district will select and administer a series of aptitude, diagnostic, and standardized achievement assessments, which provides information related to a student's learning potential, as well as longitudinal achievement data on individual learners and cohorts of students in the district. Other appropriate assessments may be used for diagnostic purposes. The third paragraph would start with the The school district shall assess learning based on the current standards and curriculum being used in classrooms across the district. This includes, but is not limited to, school improvement assessments, common course and grade level assessments, and unit tests. These assessments, along with standardized assessments, provide a broader picture of a student's, '(s), abilities and attainment of standards. In addition, surveys and student focus groups provide a picture of a student's thoughts, feelings, and attitudes.
Questions or comments? I just will note that we went over these in some detail at our study session, and some of the corrections or adjustments that have been made were discussed at that time, so that may be the reason why there aren't too many questions.
And typically, we have a week before the changes that were made at study before we bring them to committee, so that's why I'm identifying the changes that we made. You all know what they are, but I'm just trying to incorporate them.
President Burton.
Yes, just noticed this too. In the very last sentence, last line, we may want to strike A before students, because we're really not looking for so much for, when the sentence reads, surveys and student focus groups provide a picture of a student's thoughts, feelings, and attitudes. We're really primarily looking for groups of students as opposed to individual students' thoughts, feelings, and attitudes.
S apostrophe.
So I would, right, and remove the word A.
Makes sense.
Then you wouldn't even need an apostrophe, would you?
Yeah, you would. But both of those sentences would have to be adjusted because they each refer to us students, those last two sentences.
Provide a broader picture of students or a student's abilities and attainments of standards. So that, the second to last one. These assessments, along with standardized assessments, provide a broader picture of, I think it should be a
I do too.
student's abilities and attainment of standards. And then the last one would be, in addition, surveys and student focus groups provide a picture of students' thoughts, feelings, and attitudes.
Right. Because with
Does that make
assessments,
sense?
yeah, assessments, we
Mrs.
are looking
Jarvis,
for
does that make
individual learners.
sense to leave the A?
Okay, then we'll have to, on that last sentence, invert the apostrophe as well.
Yes.
Any other questions on policy II?
And so we would also be voting on the removal of IIA.
Correct.
Yes.
And then the last, IIC.
IIC, instructional program, use and dissemination of assessment results, changing the word test to assessment. We've rewritten this one. The district will provide all parents, guardians, and students who are over 18 full access to personal educational data. Student records will not be released to a third party without prior written consent of the parent, guardian, or student if over 18, with the exceptions made for Livonia Public Schools staff, governmental educational agencies, or other persons as provided by law.
Questions? Seeing none, then we will put these on for first reading. Thank you, Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you.
And that concludes policy, President Burton.
Thank you. Item 7 is personnel. Mrs. Bradford?
We do not have anything this evening.
All righty. And item 8 is legislative. Mrs. Jarvis?
We have no report for tonight.
All righty. Thank you for those of you who have hung in there with us, including our cabinet team. We have reached the end of our agenda, and we are now adjourned. We will see you next week for our regular meeting. Have a nice evening.